This is the walkthrough of Lab 1, Graphing Motion. In this lab, you're going to be examining the 7 basic lines or curves that make up every graph that you'll ever see. If you scroll down to the bottom of page 1 of the instruction document and look onto page 2, you'll see all the basic curves. Let's go over to the report document. Now, in this document, you're going to fill out your responses, insert screenshots, and this is the document that you're going to upload to Moodle to be graded. So we ask that you upload it either as a Pages document or a docx, or a PDF file. Other files, we have had issues with the screenshots not coming through, and so we want to make sure that you get credit for everything you do. So please let us know if you don't have access to one of these, and we can try to help you get access to that. So you'll notice in the table you see all the 7 basic lines, and there's 4 of the columns. So in the first column, it's the prediction in words. So you're going to look at this graph. All right, this is a position versus time graph. So you're going to predict what you think an object would be doing in order to create this line on a position versus time graph. So I'm going to say the object is moving at a constant speed. All right, then we'll go over to the iLab software and see if I was correct. All right, so on your sensor list, you're going to pick the wheel sensor, and it pulls up position, velocity, and acceleration. So I'm going to uncheck velocity and acceleration for now, because all we really care about is the position versus time graph. Okay, so with the iLab sensor, the wheel sensor comes from these wheels. So we're going to need to place it face down on flat surface. And I'll click record, and I'll try moving my object at a constant velocity. Well, click stop. Looks like my prediction was wrong. But what I did notice was before I started moving it, hey, I had a flat line. So I can deduce that the flat line on a position versus time graph means that an object isn't moving, it's at rest. So I'll go back to my report, and in column 3 I write the actual motion in words. So I'll just say at rest. And it doesn't matter what you predicted in words, you can leave, you don't have to worry about losing points for having a wrong prediction. The way column 2 and 3 are graded is as long as one of these is correct, you'll get the points for that. So in fact, it's also good to keep a wrong response here. That way, if you ever do go back to look over this to study, you'll remember your mistake and you'll be less likely to make it again. And if your prediction was correct, you don't even have to put anything in that third column because you were correct. So as long as one of these columns is correct, you'll get the points. In the last column, you're going to insert a screenshot of the graph that you created. So we'll go back to the iLab software. And since this graph was obviously wrong, I think I'll just create a new graph that's correct. So I will press record. Now I know the object's supposed to be at rest. And hey, I'm getting the graph I was supposed to. So to take a screenshot of this, on a Mac I have this grab tool, and I use it so much I keep it down here in my toolbar. And I'll go up to capture and click selection. I'll move this box out of my way, and then I'll just click and drag over the part of the graph that I want to insert. Then I'll copy this, go back to my report, and I'll paste. So now you're going to repeat that for the remaining 6 lines. Now, back in the instructions, Step 2 asks you to look at this graph that combines several of the lines and curves into one complex graph. And there's labeled different portions on the graph because in the report you're going to say what's happening during different intervals. So you'll go back to your iLab software and you're going to try to recreate this graph and determine what type of motions make this graph. Then in part 2, you're going to look at the 7 basic lines and curves again. Only this time you're going to look at what they look like on a velocity versus time graph. So if we look at the report, again under part 2 we have a table that has all the 7 lines, and these are lines on a position versus time graph. So in the second column, you're going to predict what the corresponding velocity versus time graph looks like. So I'm using pages here, so I'm going to go up to the top, click on shape, and there's a line, and I'm going to go over to the formatting, and under text wrap I'm going to click none. That way I can insert this on top of anything I want. And I'll say, well, I think that this is going to be a flat line also. Okay, and so you can use whatever you want to create a line on the graph. You can use paint or something, and it doesn't matter. So now we'll go back to the iLab software, and I'll click reset. And this time, we're going to need to go back to the wheel sensor and check off velocity so we can see what the corresponding velocity versus time graph looks like. So I'll click record, I'll leave my card at rest again, and I'll click stop. And yes, in fact, it was a flat line. Only difference I noticed was that the velocity is at 0. Well, of course it's at 0 because it's at rest. So when I go back to the reports, I had it about at 3. So again, no need to change that. That was just my prediction. You're not getting graded on your prediction. And like I said before, it's a good idea to even keep your mistakes there so that you can remember not to make them again. So in the third column, you're going to, again, insert a screenshot. And then you'll repeat that for the remaining graphs. Then back to the instructions. Step 2, again, you have another complex graph, only this time it's on a velocity versus time graph. So you're basically going to do the same thing. You'll go back to the iLab software and you'll try to recreate this graph. And in the report, you'll say what type of motion creates each part of the graph. Now, both parts of this lab have some analysis questions. And in the second part, the last 2 ask you to sketch some graphs. So in question 3, you have a position versus time graph. And it's asking you to sketch the corresponding velocity versus time graph. Well, you can sketch that in Paint or something if you want, or you can just go back to the iLab software and create this graph and go ahead and take a screenshot of the corresponding velocity graph. And that's it for Lab 1.